Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Vera, and I will be your moderator. Before I hand the mic over to our today's presenter, Maurice Kalinowski, I have a few things to mention. We would love to hear from you during today's presentation, so please, if you have any questions for our speaker, enter those through the Q&A button. These will be answered in the end of this session. The webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a copy of it delivered to your email account later after this session. But now, over to our speaker. Maurice, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome to everyone here. I see this is a pretty big round, so that's nice to see. Today's topic is going to be about the upcoming Qt 6.2 release, and specifically how it compares to Qt 5.15. Given the context that it has been a new major release, I wanted to give a bit more of the background, how it all started, how we took the approach of introducing a major release, what happened then, where we are right now, and then also go into the situation of how would we recommend to do the upgrading, etc. But then also look like, okay, what's then the next steps for us, because 6.2 is one milestone within the Qt 6 lifetime itself. Okay, so let's get started. Talking about Qt 6, this all from a public awareness basically started with Lars Knoll, our CTO, providing an article which he called the technical vision for Qt 6, where he has been talking about a couple of considerations we have had for a revamp of Qt itself, specifically talking about what we want to do about graphics in general, QML as the declarative language to use, but also as tooling is getting more and more important, what we are looking into that. I see a question that there is a problem with sound. I guess everybody else can hear me.
Yes, please let us know if there's
okay. So sorry, Nuno, that seems to be an issue on your side. Yeah, and in addition to that, also like in regards of what has happened on C++ side, but also additional languages, because we recognize that there is upcoming languages in addition to C++, predominantly Python and others. Also, one other important aspect for us has been that Qt 5 has now been out for more than basically 8 years. We launched 5.0 in 2012. And lots of things has happened since then. In 2012, even though there was a C++ 11 standard, there was hardly a compiler you could find which has implemented that standard. Now that we are in 2021, that pattern has completely changed. Just look at, for instance, C++ 17, where all compilers were ready even beforehand of the final stamp of the consortium. So that also led us to the situation that we needed to do quite a lot of things in that aspect. And out of that vision, then we basically started creating what we call basically the objectives, which form it kind of a bit more on a higher level. So we want Qt to be the productivity platform for the future. And when we're talking about a platform, the framework and the APIs is one aspect in that. But as I said, we also wanted to look into the circumventing or surrounding tools around that. What do we have been emphasizing? The design development workflow, looking into quality assurance tools like Squish, etc., etc. So how do we get that also from the software development lifecycle fully covered in Qt itself? And what does Qt 6 need to bring on the table to basically enable this platform and moving from a framework towards the platform? Naturally, next generation user experience coming from the fact that we are predominantly known as a user interface product itself. So Qt is mostly known for creating cross-platform UIs, excelling on the embedded side, etc., from a 2D as well as 3D experience. And lastly, also expanding on what we call the scalability aspect in regards of target platforms. Qt has a long background on the desktop, then came the mobile, then the embedded segment, and recently also we've been releasing Qt for microcontrollers as well in regards of utilizing QML to run these on the microcontrollers. The thing is that we want to build upon that and actually also broaden the support even more in regards of more embedded hardware. IMX8 is currently almost the de facto standard to be used on embedded Linux, and also other real-time operating systems. but there's the next generations to come, etc. And when we're talking about the mobile OSs, there's a continuous release flow of new Android and iOS versions. We recognize that Windows 11, for instance, is coming out of the door, etc. So also all the things we want to take care of and also like bring in the next versions or already have been looking into to a large extent. But I guess the big question for us has been, how do we get there? We have a very good product. 5.15 was the last Qt 5. Qt 5, sorry, was the 5.15 was the last LTS release within the Qt 5 series. We knew we had a couple of ideas in regards of what we wanted to achieve with Qt 6, but how do we get there? And there has been a significant difference between the transition from Qt 4 to Qt 5, which is why I wanted to reiterate on our approach, as it has been approved or also discussed on the contributor summit with all the contributors and the community, etc. So if you look into Qt itself, from a user perspective or from a developer perspective, that can often be seen as one big block. But actually, and that already happened in the 5.0 timeframe, Qt has always consisted of what we call the essentials modules and then additional add-ons to that. With the essentials, that basically covers things like I/O, file, threading, etc., networking, connectivity-related assets, but also both graphic stacks in regards of widgets, as well as declarative with then QML and Qt Quick on top of that. So those are covered in the essentials. And then you have the add-ons on top of that, which provide, well, additional features to the core set, where usually the split is in between. Essentials is what basically everyone is using and requiring to have a Qt solution. And then the add-ons are more like for specific use cases. That can, for instance, be Bluetooth or NFC, which is very important on the mobile side, for instance, but also other modules which then either are for a certain target architecture or for specific use cases. So that split has already been happening. In the Qt 4 to Qt 5 migration, what we did at that point in time was to bring everything in one go, meaning at the 5.0 release over from Qt 4 to Qt 5. The advantage has been that all modules already have been there from the initial release. The problem for us has been that Qt follows the principle of time-based releases, meaning you only have very fixed slots where we can release a new minor version or major version of Qt. And the problem was then that we have been able to get all modules to Qt 5 back then, but we haven't necessarily been able also to bring many of the modernizations from the essentials towards the add-ons. That implied that, for instance, certain performance benefits we have had in Qt Core or somewhere else, those didn't necessarily end up then in the add-on modules. And that is something we really wanted to improve upon. If we fix something in the baseline, we also want to utilize that in the additional add-ons then directly while modernizing these add-ons. The problem then naturally is, as I said initially, Qt is a very huge product. So discussing with the community and the contributors, etc., we came to the conclusion that we want to take an iterative approach. So the initial Qt 6.0 release will take all these modernizations, and I will get more into the details, which are what are these features, etc. Take care of these in the 6.0 release, and to some extent already have some of the add-ons supported. But as I said, the essentials covers what every Qt application or every Qt project needs. Have that supported in 6.0, give it out to you, to the users, that we can also provide feedback. And then from there, iteratively add in the other add-ons so that at that point in time, you will also have all, I'm going to clarify that a bit more later, all features from Qt 5 also then available in Qt 6 with modernized APIs, but also with the underlying technology being completely revamped or renewed and et cetera, to the extent possible. That is the process which has been happening within Qt 6.1 and 6.2. And that is also why, from our perspective, 6.2 is now a very important release. With 6.0, we wanted to show like, okay, this is where it's going. This is what we have been doing. asking for experimentation, prototyping with that, how's the feedback, where we have been receiving actually rather good feedback, and then bring that over to the existing projects. So with 6.2, for any majority of the projects, you will now be able to migrate from Qt 5 to Qt 6, and that marks it as such a crucial release. In addition to that, we've also been seeing, or our statement is that 6.2 also has a sufficient quality, meaning 6.2 is going to be the first long-term support release, which we are putting out then at the end of September, meaning in 2 weeks almost. Okay. So now that I've been covering like how we wanted to take or target the Qt 6 release in itself and how the migration steps have been, let's a bit reiterate on the features, because the purpose of this webinar is to showcase what are the features between, or the differences between 5.15 and 6.2. So from a module perspective, as I said, the idea is that you will have a parity level on that between those two. So everything I'm covering now is basically the topping on the cake as such. So what are the new things which might excel you, or which helps us to have Qt last for at least the next 10 years with Qt 6 before we even start considering a new version? Predominantly, it's the rendering hardware interface. That's one of the UI assets we are very proud of and which are very crucial. When we have been releasing 5.0 again in 2012, everybody was thinking that OpenGL is going to be the de facto standard for any kinds of hardware acceleration. That was the case on Mac and on Linux. Microsoft wasn't necessarily putting too much effort into Direct3D themselves. Mobile platforms were using OpenGL, and also on the embedded side, there wasn't necessarily hardware capabilities yet, but if you were talking to the semiconductors, everybody said at that point in time, well, if we go to hardware acceleration, it's going to be OpenGL. Now, fast forward to, well, 2020 or 2019, when we started with the vision, things have changed significantly. So Apple has been, for instance, releasing Metal for the iOS platform as well as for the macOS. You could kind of say that OpenGL found its own successor with Vulkan, in regards of that it's completely reiterating on how you actually are supposed to do hardware acceleration. And out of that, when also Microsoft decided, okay, let's put Direct3D version 12 out, with also like taking many inspirations from like the other frameworks which have been there. So the statement from our side that we bet on OpenGL clearly didn't hold now for the next years to come. And that is what RHI takes care of. Stands for the rendering hardware interface, which does take care that all your applications run on whatever hardware acceleration you have. That happens inside the GUI module on startup. So it checks basically which are the capabilities. And if there's multiple ones, you can either let Qt decide, or you choose on your own which hardware acceleration you want to use. But when we're talking about hardware acceleration, there's also the additional aspect of you need like shader compilation, etc., etc. Usually you would need to do these when specific to basically the acceleration you are using. And with the Qt shader tools, which basically sums up as QSB, which is based on another open standard, that's a tool which allows you to create shaders in a agnostic way, say it like that. And within the build process, it will then create the specific shaders and compile these to be the specific hardware acceleration. The good thing about that is also that this is very future-proof. So whatever is now happening within the next 10 years, we do have the foundation and the building blocks for whatever is to come that will be supported by Qt. And even better for you, it should be then supported also implicitly. By us providing a new version, you will be able to target new kind of accelerations with either a simple switch or a command line argument, or if not even implicitly just when you run it on the hardware. We've not, sorry, there's an issue in my presentation now, I guess. We've been looking significantly into what we can do in that field, and then you might have recognized that there's multiple modules now covering that, looking into different use cases. What we are looking into right now with Qt Quick 3D is like, how do you set up a easy 3D integration to 2D, other way around, etc. Really talking about the easy setup. You might remember Qt 3D, which has a very valid use case when it's about creating your own renderer, etc. So sophisticated use cases. And with Qt 6 and Qt Quick 3D, we have been really looking into like easy getting started. How do you integrate these kind of contexts or contents into your application? That covers when also like, well, particle effects, things like that, but also specifically the toolability. One thing we have been shifting around significantly is that it's one thing if a framework supports certain features like certain particle effects, but the problem is if you look into how user interfaces get created, you have UI designer, you have UX designers, etc., and they are not going to code these. Specifically, if you look into overall how the world is changing, it's not that PDF specifications are written anymore, and then you have a development team which needs to one by one code these specifications then afterwards. That's clearly not how it's working these days. So the important thing is whatever we provide in there also needs to be fully toolable. In that specific context now for the design studio as well. So that is what we have been looking into as well in regards of having the engine, having the features, but also making them automatically or as soon as possible toolable so that those are usable from any kind of user persona. There is lots of additional things. And I think for timing, okay, I'm pretty good on time. So that was from the value proposition side, like 2D and 3D, also the RHI, etc. Let's go a bit more into the non-UI assets as well, because that's a huge part in Qt as well. There's naturally new operating systems coming, new platforms coming. And one of our core promises with Qt is to have these covered and supported for you. I guess the most prominent one now is Mac on ARM with the M1 chips by Apple. But also Windows on ARM, we are already looking into because we do recognize that there's a clear trend towards getting the potentially having devices when out there covering that. And then Microsoft with the Surface Go is just the start. One additional aspect is, and that's where we see real potential, is WebAssembly. And WebAssembly in that context of being able to bring Qt into the cloud, well, into the web context basically as such, and also with Qt Web Engine, having that the other way around, if you need to have web content being presented in your native application with Qt. So that's basically when the bidirectional approach, and that you can have both solutions. So far, with Web Engine, we've been taking care, you get web into Qt, with WebAssembly, you can get Qt into the web as well, which also opens up for some interesting nested approaches sometimes, but that's a different story. I've been mentioning Android and iOS as well, but there's new versions coming, and then clearly we will take care of that. Mentioning C++, I've already said that, but the world has been moving much faster these days. The standards are implemented faster, etc., etc., and yet Qt has a compatibility promise. So in that respect, we've been able to make sure that you as a user are capable of using C++ 17 or 20, but we haven't been able to utilize all these benefits on our own in a Qt perspective. So Qt 5 has always been stating C++ 11 is what you need from a compiler perspective, which has been working well from a user perspective because you could basically choose which version to use, but it was kind of holding us back. And with Qt 6, and as I said, that's being planned now for the next 10 years around, that clearly shows that we also wanted to lift that. And then C++ 17 has many, many crucial features we wanted to also utilize on our own, which is why Qt 6 has now C++ 17 as the minimum version, but we're also capable of using that when internally as well. Many things have happening also when it comes to, let's say, everyday use cases, which sometimes don't sound too fancy, but are actually pretty hard to implement. One could be the high DPI. High DPI is sometimes easy. Okay, I'm a product manager, I can say that. In the context of if you have like a 2-to-1 ratio, like for instance, what Apple is doing mostly in the cases. So it's 2-by-1, so you can easily scale up or scale down. Usually that's what you want to do. But everybody who's using a Windows system is aware of like the 150%, 125% scaling differently for each monitor, etc. It's a continuous effort to do that, but we have been implementing significant improvements also in these kind of use cases for Windows multi-monitor setup with different scalings, etc. But also when it comes to native UI aspects, an application should really look native if you are developing a desktop application. We have been looking into the desktop styles. You probably have seen reference cases of the latest macOS style, etc. Those are also supported in both angles and from the graphics stack. Qt for Python is getting more and more awareness, either as a standalone solution, if you are in a Python world and it needs basically a graphical user representation. But also we're getting more and more interest these days into how are you capable of extending your application, make it scriptable, etc., etc. So these are things we are looking into right now, in addition to our Qt for Python and PySide offering. And if you have any feedback in that respect, please come back to us. We would really like to discuss these more. QML tooling that covers really like what can we make or what can we implement or provide to speed up your development. I guess I'm going to refer to that quite often now. On our Qt blog, you can see that we just have been releasing a couple of articles when it comes to QML lint, which takes care of, well, making sure that your syntax is okay, QML former to get a unified layout of your QML applications, etc. Tools like that, which help significantly, and tools which are already available. In the Outlook, I want to talk a bit more about what's next to come. I haven't been really talking about the property system, but again, there's quite many articles on that which has been happening there, how it helps you to speed up your application when it comes to, do you really need to go through the whole chain of events when you have a sensor which you want to visualize? Do you need basically to get like updates every millisecond if the sensor requires that? Use cases like that where you can easily spare CPU cycles by the new property system. The binding support then has naturally a big impact there, etc., etc. On package management and Conan, there will be further updates coming soon, but to make sure, we have been switching to CMake itself as the build system, and then now we're also leveraging Conan in regards of how can you integrate that into your build system from a project perspective, which also then helps from a deployment perspective, that you can basically much easier use that in CI and CD systems, etc. There is so much more to talk about, and then that's just a couple of individual classes basically already happening in Qt Core. So I really urge you to go through the documentation and then also check like, okay, what are all the things which has happened in the Qt 6 series for each module then itself. I've been now basically looking into some of the highlights, some of the enablers, but as I said, there's so many neat features and also niceties in there, which are going to help you quite a lot. What I've been talking about now so far is everything which has happened already in the 6.0 release. So you can see that this is quite a lot of things, to say it like that. And that is also why we have been taking that iterative approach. If we were to port everything in one go, we have not been able to do that for 6.0. And some of these things might even have needed to slip to then Qt 7 or something like that. So what has happened afterwards? I already when I was talking about the process in itself, what we then needed to take care of, we're now in a situation where we have all these modernizations in place, but how do we get now the existing projects also migrating? For new projects, it's easy. You just start with Qt 6 and be happy, right? But for existing projects, you do have dependencies also on modules which are not there, etc. yet. And that is like the big process we have, which we internally called like the feature parity, in regards of, there's already a huge list of add-ons we actually managed in 6.0, but we also wanted to get like all the other modules ported to 6.2, as I said, released in 2 weeks, being the first LTS release, so that it's really showcasing this is the release to where you can start the migration. So already in the 6.1 timeframe, we have been able to also get some of these modules in. It's a smaller list because we also wanted to spare time for the feedback we got on the 6.0 release, looking into the quality related assets, etc. And then for 6.2, we have then been able to also bring all the other modules over. Interestingly, also when we released 6.1, these are the modules which we have tested in our CI, all configurations done, where we were really confident that the API is ready. We have had a situation where people were asking, okay, what's happening? One specific case would be WebSockets. WebSockets as such were ready in the 6.1 timeframe already, but we didn't necessarily feel that we're confident enough to release it already. So that is why we then took it to the 6.2 release to really have it done as we want it to be, and also make sure that all the requirements are met as such. Now, we have been releasing an article by Peter Schneider as well on that, and there has been a couple of feedback as well, because I've been talking, we want to have all/most modules being ported over. And now the question naturally is, well, most, what's missing in there, and then what's the situation there? And I want to use now some minutes to clarify the situation here as well, because we are in a situation, but it's really a case-by-case situation as well. So from that list I've been showing on the previous slide, that's like really the majority. And then we have like 4 modules which are missing so far. And I want to make sure that also to everyone that we are listening to the feedback we're getting, and also we are actively listening to the feedback we're getting on the blog post, specifically, for instance, to location, etc. And how to integrate that, and then how we are capable of handling that situation to maybe or maybe not port these. And the interesting thing here is that, as I said, all of these which are listed here are in a different state. Qt PDF, let's start with that. Qt PDF depends on Chromium. Chromium is part of the Qt Web Engine build. We barely made it to have Web Engine supported for all platforms in the 6.2 release, but you need to have this dependency chain. So we needed to have Web Engine being done before we could look into PDF. That is something we actually have been achieving, and it's similar to, like I've been referring to, the WebSockets. If you were checking out the source code, you might actually figure out that you are able to build Qt PDF in 6.2 already, so you can use that. But we haven't been looking so far into, is there some more APIs, or is there something you want to renew from that approach, etc., because PDF came in pretty late in the 5 series, etc. So it is moving along very nicely, and also very nicely thanks to the contribution from the community. Kudos to you. Sorry, I forgot your name right now. But really appreciated also that effort. And actually now I was talking about speech already. So there is active contributions on Qt Speech. Where the situation is similar to Gamepad, and Andy Nichols, the maintainer of Gamepad, also gave a comment on the article. The problem with these two is we could easily port these over to Qt 6, but we don't know if like what we have been doing with these modules is actually the right approach for the next 10 years to come. Qt Speech as such was started, I think, like 6 or 7 years ago, and we wanted to have a twofold approach. One is the text-to-speech, which is existing. The other one is speech in regards of speech recognition. How do you do like all building blocks, etc., etc. The big difference is, like 7 years ago, there were many entities trying to get into this field, and we didn't necessarily focus on that much, so there was not much of a progress in there as well. And now you have, for instance, the big fours, who are the big 4 providers, meaning Amazon, Microsoft, Google, etc., who basically do provide these functionalities. So it might be good to take a step back, look into like, okay, do we want to support that from a Qt perspective? Probably we would do that in a provider agnostic way, because Qt is a cross-platform, cross-API, cross-service solution. What would we do there then? And for the text-to-speech, is it sufficient to have, well, it's Qt Speech, say, basically, and then provided a string and then be done with it and hope to have it localized depending on your speaker and speed settings. So it's, and for the Gamepad, there was a consideration that maybe that should be more generic in regards of any kinds of additional haptic input devices. gamepad sounds very specific to, well, gamepads. That's also how it came in. But there might be better approaches, and I haven't even been talking about all the multi-touch gesture supports, etc., which we're looking into from a Qt Quick perspective, which is something which Sean is looking into. We have been doing major steps there already, and then we're far from being done. So it might actually be that all the gamepad requirements are actually implicitly when implemented on the Qt Quick layer already. And lastly, there's the location. Location has two big problems from our perspective. One is it is purely depending on OpenGL. So that was because Qt 5 had that OpenGL had requirements. So we knew that OpenGL is doable. So that would basically need to rewrite the rendering stack in there. And the interesting thing is, if we were to rewrite the rendering stack, which elements of that would we actually need? Is it about rendering a map, a couple of dots in there? Or is this about the full navigation solution, which you have right now? You get points of interest, you can render routes, you can create the backend, so that, etc., etc. From our understanding right now, the 90% of the use cases are really about showing a map, potentially one or two items on that as a highlight. And that's about it. So all the other surrounding assets might not be needed, but that is something we need to also verify with our users, our customers, etc. And we really appreciate also the feedback we got on the blog post, on Jira, etc., also individually from our customer support, etc. So that is currently what we're looking into, like how do we want to bring it back? If we bring it back, when we're going to bring it back. So please stay tuned on that. And I can only once again say we are listening to that feedback. From a timing perspective, there's nothing we can commit to right now, but also we appreciate that feedback we have been receiving on that. Okay, so much for 6.0, 6.2. And feature migration, etc., module migration, so that you are capable of applying that. But that doesn't mean that this has been the only thing we've been looking into from 6.0 to 6.2. On the Qt Quick 3D side, we've been looking into the instant rendering, particles, morphing, etc. On the networking side, you are now capable of creating your own TLS backends, which is, for instance, interesting if you don't want to use the, well, either native backend or OpenSSL, you want to have something else, for instance, Wolf SSL or something like that, you would be capable of plugging that into. So from a user perspective, you would not need to change the code. Basically, it's a launch argument, which backend to load, or you do it in the code, which backend to load, and then be done with that. On the Android side, we have now been creating the public JNA API, which in 6.0 was more like a semi-private. So we had it. We asked users to play around with it, to test it, whether it fits all the use cases. But then also now we are confident enough to say, okay, this is like the public JNI. You have the JNI object. So how do you interfere with Java and on the Android platform? There's new platforms coming as well. QNX 7.1 being supported. We're looking into integrity. Embedded Linux, we got new hardware references. Dialogues got an update. Again, more updates on the tooling. And now on the 6.2 side, I also want to highlight the multimedia, which we also have been revamping significantly due to the fact that it has been growing to a situation that it was covering quite many edge cases, which sometimes is good if you have like a complete solution. But the more complete you get, the more sophisticated and potentially complicated it is also to get started. And Qt Multimedia always was about having an easy start, rendering a video, playing some audio, record some audio, taking a picture with the camera, and then that's about it from the 90% use cases. There's many things which has been implemented over the time because it has been used for this project, for that project, for this user, or for that customer, etc. So we've been kind of losing focus on there. And what Lars and the team has been looking into, like, okay, can we clean up this API? Many things have been taken into account, also API modernizations in. Well, how do you actually use multimedia APIs these days? What can we do to bring in C++ 17 features, etc., etc.? So that is what we have been doing in the multimedia side to really focus on the core cases, actually most of the cases now, and bring that in a refreshed API. So from all the modules which have been ported, multimedia might be the one where you would need most of the investigations on, okay, how does this now work there? How does that now work there from this perspective? But as I'm talking about the migration already, how would you do that? I guess that's always a good question, specifically if you have an existing project, and then how do you want to verify? Whereas the, let's say, simplistic approach, you just take Qt 6 and compile and see what happens. But also there's the chance of maybe provide a bit more structured way. First of all, we have been putting quite a lot of effort when it comes to the documentation itself. So each module in itself has a porting guide, not only about, yeah, we switch from QMake to CMake, now you call it CMake, be done with it. No, what we have been looking into is really like when function signatures have been changed, how did they do that? What do you need to do with the code, etc. So you get a really sophisticated list for all the API changes we've been doing from Qt 5 to Qt 6. When it's about the process itself, we usually recommend to switch to Qt 5.15 first. For some of you, that might be surprising, but there's quite many projects actually which are on 5.12 still, if not even older versions. From our side, we would recommend migrate to 5.15 first, because that gives you a couple of options. In 5.15, we have been able to already mark a couple of APIs as deprecated, where we knew this is going to happen in the future. We are going to rewrite these. And what you can do is that you can specify Qt disable deprecated before as a define. And you can specify which version. So you can basically pick 5.15 there. And what happens is if you compile your project, then you will get warnings of the functions of Qt you're using, which will not be there in a Qt 6 way anymore. For some of these, we already have the replacements in 5.15. On the other cases where where you might need to switch to Qt 6, then you already are aware of, okay, how often, on how many instances do I now need to change something like that. That's going to help you quite a lot already. And then naturally, if you're using Qt Creator, those are also then already been shown in the code editor, etc. for you based on Clazy and other contributions also in regards of, well, helping you already marking the situations what to do. Sometimes it's a quick fix, and sometimes you are at least aware of what you need to do to change in there. I've been not mentioning yet that we also have, like similar before, a compatibility module. In Qt 3 and Qt 4, those have been usually been called like Qt 3 support, Qt 3 support, Qt 4 support. It's now Qt 5 compatibility. That also helps you in migrating in case we have new classes, for instance. I guess the most prominent example would be regex. Regex has already been deprecated kind of in the Qt 5 lifecycle because it's now Q regular expression. But even there, we wanted to put QRegEx into the compatibility module. So if you link to that, you are even able to still use that while you are migrating. So that would then be an iterative approach, link against the compat module, get it running on Qt 6, and then one by one try to remove the features which you're still using from the compat module itself. We do have a webinar been done by Kari on that as well. I've been linking that to the documentation. You can also find it on our webpage on Q.io in the resource section, but also on YouTube, you should be able to find that very easily, where it also goes a bit more into the details coming to that. And there's one more example I would like to bring in, and that is, for instance, how we do that from a Qt Creator perspective. So since quite some time, you're now capable of compiling Qt Creator against Qt 5 and Qt 6 simultaneously with a couple of if-defs, but generally that's possible. So what we're doing is you have basically the dev branch of Creator, which can compile against both. Whenever we do releases, so far, we have still been putting these out with Qt 5. And what's happening now within the next release is that it's basically a compile switch in our CI infrastructure saying, no, don't use Qt 5, now use Qt 6, and we have the release packages ready. That can really help in the porting effort generally, especially if you have larger solutions. So as I said, go to 5.15, enable the Qt 6 mode, if possible, have like dual compilation capabilities. Like if your R&D then is capable of compiling against Qt 6, you still might deploy against Qt 5, and then it's just a flip of a switch. And afterwards, it's the cleanup effort, like remove all the Qt 5 references, etc. afterwards. But that's then a very natural flow when it comes to that. And you might now say, okay, this sounds great in theory, but luckily we have a large community. And I just want to highlight 3 examples in here from our partner from Basiscom, but also KDAP has been looking into quite a lot of things here. The feedback we receive specifically compared to also previous major updates is that this approach actually has been very good. Burkhard has been right in regards of his conclusion that, well, he was missing modules like serial bars, remote objects in 6.0. But I hope I've been able to bring the message over why that has been the case, that these modules are not available in 6.0 yet. But now with 6.2, that process would be even easier. So the migration process is working really, really well, especially now with 6.2, that we do have the majority of the modules. And if you are part of the 1 or 2 ones, as I said, there is already progress in there. You might actually be able to use them already from Git. And other than that, we are also there to help you if you have additional questions towards that. Now, 6.2 going to be released at the end of September. Worst case, if we now still figure out something beginning of October. So what's happening next? I could easily tease now you and say that we have the World Summit coming up in the end of October, beginning of November. Sorry, I need to check. But a couple of weeks after the 6.2 release, there's the World Summit, where we will generally provide a bit more details on what is coming next, but also focus on how you can utilize lots of these features, which we now have been releasing on 6.2, in addition to the migration-related aspects. But still, I also want to bring like a couple of highlights in there. So you might remember that there has been an additional article, not only the technical vision of all Qt, but also by Ulf, a post on the division for QML itself. There has been a very often reviewed and commented post on YouTube from the World Summit from, like, I think 2 or 3 years ago on division of QML, how we want to move that forward to. And we now have most of the building blocks ready. Like the new property system, like the QML tooling we've been talking about so far, etc., so that we now can start implementing that vision. That is most prominently the static, strict, and dynamic mode. Dynamic mode being basically, as you know, QML these days. You have a runtime which parses your QML. You can have all the JavaScript functionalities in there, etc. Dynamically load new content, etc., etc. So it's extremely flexible, and that's also one of the benefits of how most people are using QML. On the other hand, having a runtime and having an engine taking care of that naturally costs you also resources. So if you already are aware of all the content you have, why not check that everything is prepared already at launch time, so that you don't have these loading mechanisms, etc., etc. That would be the very other end, which we call static QML. In that respect, you would also then be able that during the build process, you can traverse or transpile the QML to C++, get it really pre-compiled already before you even launch the application. And that is going to help you significantly then on runtime, because, well, you don't need to do all the parsing, the engine initialization, etc., etc. So that's the other end. And the strict mode is basically something you want to have in between, because static mode really is like, as the name says, very statically or very concise in what you're allowed to use. And from there, we're currently looking into what kind of QML features are we able to still provide, but still keep it compilable in that respect, that you can use these toolings. That is more or less going to be let's say a transitional period, and that might very much depend also on the upcoming releases. For those of you who have already been using Qt for microcontrollers, you can pretty much compare the static mode to what Qt Ultralight does. So that would be a good understanding for you also what's possible, and then how that will also now soon be available from the Qt proper side. I've been talking about WebAssembly already quite a lot. On 6.2, the state is going to be that it's going to be a tech preview, but with we're currently mostly sure that it's going to be 6.4 latest to have the full support for WebAssembly. We want to put a bit more of the focus on specific assets that can be either to UI tweaks, etc., but also in regards of sometimes the runtime or platform specific features. That being, well, on a desktop, things like we have been looking to unify the taskbar, etc., etc. There has been a post by Turane on that, how we have been traversing all the modules together to make a common API to the extent possible, etc., etc. And if you're looking into the embedded side, we are really want to focusing here on improving on already our strong position in regards of native performance, tooling in general when it comes to designers, but also right-hand side QA tools. With now being FrogLogic being part of the Qt company, there's the test center in there. How can you do like real fleet deployment and fleet testing, etc., etc. in that respect. Okay, but more details on that than on the World Summit. And with that, I'm mostly through with my presentation. I guess you can all read like the quick summary on that. But yeah, if there's one thing I would like to highlight, when we think that Qt 6.2 is the release where it's going to be ready for you to migrate to Qt 6. We have lots and lots of additional features and enablers, and there's even more to come, as I have just been giving a quick glimpse on that. And with that, I am now available to your questions.
Thank you, Maurice. So yes, please use the Q&A button to add your questions. I can see that we already have a lot of questions here.
Oh, okay. I didn't see the scroll bar. Okay.
So first question, how much is 2D, 3D workflow meant to be accessible for one-man projects when there are no separate designers around? Should I still take a designer hat and design UI and then separately generate and iterate on the code for it?
That's a very good question. So let's put it differently. I do have an R&D background, and to be honest, if there's one thing I recognized in 15 years of coding is that I'm not a designer. It always feels for me easier. But on the other hand, if as soon as I started being in the office with the people who do design studio and do have some experience in there, you do recognize that it's actually fairly easy to use. You need to do that mindset, and you need to train for that a bit to how do you switch like from a developer hat to a designer hat. Once you've been doing that, I would really recommend to take the design tools, take the output of the design tools, and then continue from a coding perspective from there. There's also one additional aspect in there, because we've been talking about Qt, the framework, and 6.2 in here, but if we're broadening that discussion, Qt Design Studio has two advantages. One, it creates the QML code for you and for the developers to do things. The other big asset in here is that designers tend to use other tools like Photoshop, etc., to create these visual assets, and then how do you compose these together, etc. So even there is yet another big advantage, even for a one-man project, because you probably are going to use some other tools, some designer tools as well to create your assets, etc. Okay, then we have PDF. I hope I have been able to answer that one. Oops.
Yes. I think there's almost 25 questions, so maybe if you go through and
okay, let me see. Okay, let me. Oh, you've been answering, but okay. Yeah, PDF, I think we answered. There's another one on Qt charts. How about enhancing Qt charts with some newer features, more chart types, 3D, etc. When it comes to 3D, we do have the data visualization module as well. And yes, there is quite many ideas what we could do, both from an architectural standpoint, but also when it comes to new features. I think the difference also is here, and that's just what I want to highlight as well. We have Qt charts, which covers the basic use cases. If you're really looking into sophisticated ones, there is from the community and partners also solutions which might help you already right now. So especially if you compare it to other cross-platform solutions, we provide a very, very large common stack for everyone with many, many features, but also there's others contributing to that also with additional features, additional products, etc. So there might also be other solutions for you to look into in addition to Qt, which help you than as of now. We have been planning to use Qt Gamepad, but we stopped development when discovered was thinking it. Yeah. Okay, like this. Okay, we have been planning to use Qt Gamepad, but we stopped development when we discovered it was not going to be in 6.0, 6.2. Okay, yeah, as I said, in that respect, I hope I have been giving the explanation there as well. You actually would be able to use Gamepad already. It's just not provided as of now because we think we have better means on supporting that use case. So please check it out also on the blog post itself and check the repo. It's actually a very small module, so the effort in compiling that manually is rather low. If you do have follow-up questions, you can always go onto your interest mailing list, for instance, where you also will get help from other users. What about XML patterns? Yes, the interesting thing here is that XML patterns has been deprecated 6 years ago already. And I'm going to combine that also with the Qt script question, where we have been deprecating Qt script 4 years ago already. So at that point in time, we've already been stating there is much better solutions rather than what we have been using in XML patterns or Qt script. In both cases for Qt script as well, that various other solutions which either help there, also Qt based for XML patterns, etc., which is not part of our core offering, and it has been very, very niche. But as I said, if those have been deprecated since 6 years already, so 6 years ago already we were referring or preferring you to not use it, and naturally now with Qt 6, things which have been deprecated for 5 years, where we basically now cut it and then said, like, okay, this is not something we're going to bring over. Are there any type devs we can use to simultaneously support Qt 5 and 6 where function signatures have changed? I don't think it's going to be possible via type devs. It's going to be Qt there's a macro there's basically a defined for that, so that I'll take care of that on the compilational side. We have a lot of internal and open source libraries that need support running multiple versions of Qt, as they will upgrade at different times. I can see that, but as I said, the thing is then basically, maybe that's also a bit more looking into like how you're using it. Is it multiple tools which are compiled differently, and hence you want to migrate each tool separately? If it's one application project, as I said, my recommendation would then be have it compilable from both sides with ifdefs, and then in your build system, either locally or in your CI, define which Qt version to use by the runtime, and then potentially also have both available in your CI. So that whenever you do a change, you can also test it against Qt 5 as well as Qt 6. But that's the beauty of continuous integration these days. You are capable of testing in so many scenarios which you don't want to do locally. But once you have it automated, it's just amazing what you get everything tested without needing to take care, unless you get a regression. Qt 6 will be in use for the next 8 years. From our understanding, at least. Do I still have the sharing on? I guess maybe I can quickly go back to the very first slide. Apparently PowerPoint is not very fast when switching slides. Where is it? Here it is. So here you can see the release timelines of Qt itself. What you can see starting from 2.0 is that we have been prolonging or lengthening the release cycles of major releases with each release itself. So from our current understanding, and that's like current understanding, is that we want to build upon that to give like a compatibility promise also for very long times, because we do recognize that there's many projects out there who also have runtimes of a decade or even longer. That's also why we introduced the LTS and the long-term support in a commercial manner as well, to go beyond that. Because if you look at Qt 5 being supported for 8 years plus 3 years LTS, that would be 11 years. And then there's even additional chances to pre-lengthen that as well. So yes, the idea is that Qt 6 is going to be there for quite some time to support these kind of solutions, where you basically then need to have long-lasting support. And now I screwed up my sharing, I guess. Sorry about that. No, I was too fast. Almost there. There we are. Okay. Yeah, we had Qt 6 in the next 8 years. Qt 6 is pushing the usage for DirectX 11. What about lower-end machines that do not support DirectX 11? You are still capable of using software rendering as well. But that is also something I want to make sure. When we're talking about hardware acceleration, we do know that this is getting more and more crucial, and most do have it. But we also acknowledge the fact that it's not always available, specifically for older hardware. So there we do have the software renderer still, where you have all the rendering happening on CPU side, with all the implications then of having it run on the CPU side, meaning there might be limitations on what's possible to do. The current used MinPiler is very old and doesn't support C++17 features. When do you update the MinGW compiler on the Windows tools? Okay, MinGW. MinGW is a bit complicated because there is no de facto MinGW solutions. Actually, we're also looking into what we can do in regards of Clang. The problem with Clang is that, well, it does work fairly nice, but it still relies on the Visual Studio linker then, which is not what you want from a let's say pure open source perspective, or if you are like the major use case for MinGW is that you're fully using open source tools. Switching over to Clang would require using then some Visual Studio tools. It's really to be seen, but that's actually a good discussion also to have on the development list, or check also on the archive on the development list, because that has been discussed there also in greater detail. Oops. Seeing the internet. Can you tell us a bit more about FrogLogic and any plans you might have for Squish? First of all, the teaser for the World Summit. It's going to be a topic in there as well. For those of you who don't know Squish yet, Squish is basically an automated way for UI testing, GUI testing, any kinds of user interface testing, either on desktop, mobile, on remotely on embedded, but even for web technologies, etc. In addition to that, there is also solutions, Coco, like static analysis, and then the test center as an overarching solutions. What has happened within this year is that the Qt company has been acquiring FrogLogic, and we're currently in the integrational phase, call it like that. And yes, we do have plans, and we will discuss and then also talk about these more openly within the next time to come. Please bear that in mind, but I also have been pinpointing to that we want to have a look into Qt more from a holistic picture, overall software development lifecycle, from the prototyping development, but also then testing, quality, and at some point also deployment phase. So yes, it does play a crucial role in what we have in mind for Qt. Any changes in licensing terms for Qt 6? Is it available as open source? Of course, Qt 6 is available in open source. That is not something which has changed at all. There might be some confusion, but Qt 6 is available generally as LGPL, or some modules being on GPL. So there wasn't a single module change or such when it comes to the licensing itself. That's a very long question for 2 minutes. I think I might need to skip that because I want to be able to read it through, but we're going to get back to the questions when after the session. So in worst case, I will need to reply via email, and that's going to happen, yes. Are there some risks to start now a new project with Qt 6.0? 6.2. You're asking me? Of course, there is no risk. No, seriously. I mean, that's why we say that Qt 6.2 is an LTS release, because we have the testing infrastructure. We got the feedback from 2 releases already. So from our perspective, it's from the short cycle that Qt 6 exists, which is now 1 year, we strongly believe that 6.2 is the best release to start a migration now, and then basically get everything been done. And if you've been talking about new projects, that actually might have been helpful to already get started with 6.0 if all the modules had been available. With 6.2, yes, absolutely as well. There's even a big advantage that you don't need to take care of, I don't want to call it legacy, but maintenance of your existing project and take care of the migration. So you would be able to utilize all the new features just as you get started. So yes, clearly, that is something I would recommend. And I think with that, we are running out of time, right?
Yes. Maybe one more question, and then for the rest of the questions, we can come back for you directly.
Let's take this one, QMake, because I haven't been talking about that so far. QMake worked great in 5.15. There were many examples of how to do things in QMake. CMake is the recommended one now, but for sometimes with no previous experience on this, it's hard to work on such projects. What is the recommendation when doing a transition from QMake to CMake? That is something we do recognize actually fairly often. In the overall C++ ecosystem, CMake is de facto standard. But the more you are used and the more long time you have been using QMake really is the solution which people have been used to. By that also there is certain patterns you need to change in regards of thinking how to use a build system. The good message first is that we haven't been removing QMake and Qt6. What we have been doing is that you're not able to use QMake to build Qt6 anymore. But from your perspective as a user, you're still capable of using QMake and all the QMake related features in itself within the Qt6 cycle. And we're also maintaining that if there's other bugs popping up. Now, when it comes to overall QMake to CMake transition, there is a couple of articles we are doing on that on our own. So that is like, how do I transfer an application from one to another? We just been pushing out by Fabian an article on how you would do QML modules with CMake, because in 6.0 we had a private API to experiment, like how does it work from a CMake perspective? For instance, for like your use cases, you are used to use it like this QML within QMake. Then how do we transfer that over to CMake from a build system perspective? This is also things we have been looking into and now been able to mature with 6.2, that we do have public API for QML modules in CMake. Overall, I would recommend also to check, like there's lots and lots of references in the web in general. Also the usual suspects like Stack Overflow, our forum. If there's very specific questions, you could also go to our interest mailing lists or reach out to us via the support, depending on whether you have a license from our site or not. But my recommendation would be also to go one by one. If it's a big project, you probably have a library, you can switch that over first, or maybe just the user interface. Start with the small building blocks, the smaller projects, and then move over rather than doing everything in one big go. And then yes, that is also supported iteratively for per module library, etc. Rather than basically move that over. Okay.
Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. But if there is more questions, and for those that we did not have time to answer, we will come directly back to you. As Maurice mentioned, the Qt World Summit is coming. It will be held on 3rd of November. So please, the registration is open, so claim your spot there. And now I'd like to thank you, Maurice, and for the great presentation, and everyone for joining. Like I mentioned, this webinar was recorded, and you will receive a copy of it delivered to your email account later today. But as said, if you have any more questions, contact us on info@qt.io. Thank you all and have a great day.